In 1950, Eartha Kitt walked into a Hollywood dinner party where everyone important was supposed to be there. She was beautiful, she was talented, she was famous for her singing voice and her charm, and she was black. A white actress at the party asked her directly, "How does it feel to be a Negro among all these white people?" Eartha Kitt said later that the question stunned her, but not because it was rude. It stunned her because that woman was asking the question everyone else in that room was thinking, but too polite to say out loud. That moment captures something about Hollywood's golden age that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The untold story of interracial romance in Golden Age Hollywood. It was a world where talent and beauty could take you very far, but race could stop you cold. And if you had the terrible fortune to fall in love with someone from the wrong side of the color line, you didn't just risk your career, you risked your freedom. The Hollywood of the 1930s and 40s operated under a set of rules that nobody wrote down, but everybody understood. There was the production code, enforced by censorship chief Joseph Breen, which controlled what you could show on screen. And there were state laws, called miscegenation laws, that made it illegal for people of different races to marry in most of America. But there was something else too, something that was less official, but maybe more powerful. There was an unspoken agreement among studio executives, producers, and directors about what kinds of stories could be told. Interracial romance was not one of them. A black man and a white woman in a love scene? That was not going to happen. A white man and a black woman? Absolutely not. Even showing friendship between races on screen was considered dangerous. It might upset audiences in the South. It might upset audiences everywhere. So Hollywood did what it always did with things that made money but caused trouble. It hid them. It denied them. It rewritten them. And if you were a person of color in Hollywood who fell in love with a white person, you had to make a choice. You could hide it. You could deny it. Or you could lose your career. Lena Horne was born in 1917 to a family that had money and education. She was beautiful in a way that defied the racial categories of her time. Light skin, long hair, the kind of look that made white audiences uncomfortable because she looked like she might fit into their world, and that was threatening. She started her career in the late 1930s, performing in nightclubs and on the radio, and she was good, really good. She had a voice that made people stop what they were doing and listen. By the early 1940s, Hollywood was starting to notice her. But when she got to Hollywood, the studios did not know what to do with her. MGM signed her, but they did not give her real roles. They gave her songs to sing in movies where the scenes could be cut out when the films were shown in the South. Before Lena Horne, Hattie McDaniel had won an Oscar, but for playing a maid in Gone with the Wind. The studios knew they could only offer black actresses limited roles. They did not want her kissing any actors on screen, white or black. They were afraid that if a black woman who looked like Lena Horne got too close to a white man on screen, audiences would riot. So instead of being a leading lady, she became a performing insert. The camera would film her singing a song, and then that scene could be removed from the theatrical release, depending on what state you were in. In some places, Americans saw Lena Horne singing. In other places, audiences just saw a gap in the movie where she had been. Lena Horne was married to a white man, which was illegal in most states during the time she was trying to build her film career. Her marriage existed, but could not be publicly acknowledged in any serious way. She had to pretend she was single. She had to pretend that her husband did not exist. What makes Lena's story even more painful is that she was not just facing racism from the studios. She was facing racism from the black community in some ways, too. There were people who believed that because she was light-skinned and had white features, she was betraying her race by trying to cross over into white Hollywood. She was trapped between worlds. Too black for one world, too light-skinned for another, and no place that would actually claim her. By the 1950s, Lena Horne stopped fighting the system. She moved into nightclub performances where she had more control. She refused degrading film roles. She became a civil rights activist, and she spent the rest of her life refusing to pretend that her marriage did not exist. Sammy Davis Jr. was born in 1925, and he was a prodigy. He could sing, dance, act, and do impressions. He could do everything. By the time he was a teenager, he was already performing in major venues, and Hollywood wanted him. Here is where Sammy Davis Jr.'s story gets complicated. He was a black man in an industry that was trying to integrate very slowly and very carefully. He made movies. He performed on television. He was allowed to do things that other black performers were not allowed to do. He could work across racial lines. He could perform in front of white audiences. But there was a line he could not cross, and that line was romantic. In 1954, Sammy Davis Jr. was in a car accident that cost him his left eye. He wore a patch for a while, then later got a glass eye. When he came back from the accident, he was even more famous than before. People were fascinated by him, and he was fascinated by a white actress named Kim Novak. Now, Kim Novak was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. She was blonde, she was beautiful, and she was available, and Sammy Davis Jr. was interested. By most accounts, there was a real attraction there, and a real friendship. They were seen together in public. They went on dates, and Hollywood went into panic mode. The studio system, which had slowly started to allow black performers more roles, absolutely could not allow this. A black man dating a white woman was not just controversial, it was a threat to the entire racial order that Hollywood was trying to maintain. If America saw Sammy Davis Jr. and Kim Novak together, it might suggest that interracial romance was possible. It might suggest that love did not care about race, and that could not be allowed. There are different versions of what happened next. Columbia Pictures head Harry Cohn reportedly enlisted mob intermediaries to threaten Davis directly. Some say the studios threatened to blacklist Sammy Davis Jr. Some say they threatened to destroy Kim Novak's career. Some say they did both. What we know is that the relationship ended. In 1960, Davis married Swedish actress May Britt, causing him to be disinvited from JFK's inauguration, and the message was sent to every black performer in Hollywood. You can work, you can perform, you can become famous, but you cannot love outside your race. Sammy Davis Jr. spent the rest of his career navigating that impossible space. He became a star despite the restrictions. He won Tony Awards. He was part of the Rat Pack. He performed for presidents, but he did it all while living under an invisible line that he could not cross without risking everything. Dorothy Dandridge was an actress and singer who worked in Hollywood in the 1940s and 50s. She was talented, she had a beautiful voice, and she wanted to be a leading lady. But Dorothy Dandridge's talent was not enough to overcome one thing. She was a black woman, and Hollywood could not figure out how to put a black woman in a leading role where she would be romantically involved with anyone. So she made movies where she did not have romantic storylines. She was a background character. She was a singer. She was there to perform. What made this even more difficult was that Dorothy was in love with a white director. This was not something that could be hidden forever, but it was something that had to be hidden while it mattered. While they were working together, while her career was fragile, the relationship had to exist in secret. And when it became public, it damaged her career more than it affected his. She was the one who was seen as transgressive. She was the one who had broken an unspoken rule. Dorothy Dandridge eventually took her own life in 1965. She was only 42 years old. There were many factors, but one thing that comes through in her story is a sense of being trapped. Trapped by what she was allowed to do. Trapped by who she was allowed to love. Trapped by an industry that wanted to use her talent, but could not allow her to be fully human. The production code was not just about language and violence. It had specific rules about race, and these rules were more restrictive than anything in the actual law. The code said that films could not show any scenes that would suggest that interracial relationships were acceptable. There could be no intimacy between characters of different races. There could be no suggestion of romance. There could barely be any suggestion of friendship that went too deep. The code said that the treatment of races must be careful. This was meant to say that you could not be disrespectful to any race. But what it actually meant was that you could not show anything that would upset white audiences in states that had segregation laws. So when filmmakers wanted to make a story that involved characters from different races, they had to be creative. They could not show them falling in love. They could not show them kissing. They could not even show them alone together, in a scene that might suggest something was happening. This affected everything from the scripts to the casting. If you had a story that required a romantic relationship, you had to make sure both characters were the same race. If you had a story that involved characters from different races, you had to make sure they were never put in a situation where romance could develop. The production code was not officially about racism, but it was designed to protect segregation. It was designed to make sure that American audiences, especially audiences in the South, would never see a movie that suggested that people from different races could fall in love. Eartha Kitt was born in South Carolina in 1927. She grew up as part of a mixed-race family in a time when that was dangerous. She was a dancer and a singer, and she was brilliant. By the 1950s, she was performing in major nightclubs in Paris and New York. She also fell in love with a white man. His name was John Barry Ryan III. He was wealthy, he was connected, and he was white. They had a relationship that lasted for years. They had a child together, but they could not get married. Not legally, not in most places in America, so they kept it secret. Or as secret as you can keep something when you are a famous performer. And he is a wealthy man connected to society. For a while, this worked. But when their relationship became public, when people started to notice that Eartha Kitt had a white boyfriend, Hollywood and America in general had a reaction. Eartha Kitt was seen as a threat. She was a black woman who had crossed the line. She was desirable, she was successful, and she was involved with a white man. This was not supposed to happen. She was essentially blacklisted. She could not get work in Hollywood. Major venues would not book her. Newspapers that had once written about her glamour started writing about her scandal. In the end, Eartha Kitt and John Barry Ryan did get married, but it was much later, and by then her career had been damaged. She spent decades rebuilding her life and her career, and she never forgot what it cost her to fall in love with someone from the wrong race. By the 1950s, something was starting to shift. The civil rights movement was growing. Young people were starting to question the racial rules that their parents had lived by. And in Hollywood, there were filmmakers who were starting to ask, what if we made a movie with black and white actors as equals? What if we told a story where race did not have to be the defining issue? These filmmakers knew they would face resistance. They knew they would face angry letters. They knew they might face censorship. But they also knew that times were changing. Sidney Poitier was born in 1927 in Miami. His family moved to the Bahamas when he was very young, and he grew up in a place that was very different from the segregated South or the Jim Crow North. When he came to America as a teenager, he was shocked by racism. He had not grown up with it, and he did not accept it the way that many people who had been born into it did. He decided he was going to be an actor, and he was going to change Hollywood. Poitier was incredibly talented. He was also incredibly determined, and he had something else going for him. He was undeniably attractive. He could not be dismissed as someone who was trying to cross barriers just because he was pushing. He was a genuine star. In 1958, he made a film called Porgy and Bess, where he played opposite a white actress, Dorothy Dandridge. No, wait, that is not right. Let me correct that. In 1958, he made a film where he played a major role, but the romantic scenes had to be carefully choreographed. The studio was still nervous about showing too much closeness between a black actor and any white actress. By 1963, Sidney Poitier was in a film called Lilies of the Field, where he played a man helping a group of white nuns build a chapel. There was no romance, but there was respect. There was a story where a black man and white people could interact as equals without there being a hidden threat. And then, in 1967, he made Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. This was a film that directly addressed interracial romance. It was about a black man coming to meet the parents of his white fiancée. The entire movie was about what happens when an interracial couple wants to get married. That same year, the Supreme Court's decision in Loving versus Virginia struck down all state miscegenation laws. This film was not made in the golden age of Hollywood. This was 1967, but the fact that it was still controversial, the fact that it was still brave, shows you how recently these barriers existed. Sidney Poitier became the first black man to be a true leading man in Hollywood, and he did it by being so talented, so handsome, and so intelligent that he could not be ignored. But he also did it because the times were changing, and audiences were starting to want different stories. In 1958, there was a film called The Defiant Ones. It starred Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis. They were chained together and had to escape from prison. They had to depend on each other. They had to trust each other. This was not the first time a black and white actor had appeared in a film together, but this was maybe the first time they were shown as equals, who had to work together to survive. They could not have racial hierarchy. They could not have one of them being subservient. They had to be partners. The film was controversial. Some theaters in the South refused to show it. Some audiences were upset that a black man and a white man were shown working together as equals, with genuine respect and friendship developing between them. But the film was also successful. Audiences wanted to see it, and the fact that it was successful meant that the studios started to realize that there was an audience for stories that treated race differently. It is important to understand that Hollywood did not suddenly become less racist in 1968. The changes were slow, they were incomplete, they are still incomplete. But starting in the late 1960s, black actors started to get leading roles. Black actresses started to get romantic storylines. Interracial relationships started to appear on screen, usually as a big deal, but at least they appeared. By the 1970s, you could see films with black and white actors in romantic relationships. It was still treated as transgressive by many audiences, but it was there. The barrier had been broken, and it happened partly because of social movements. It happened partly because audiences changed, and it happened partly because there were filmmakers and actors who were willing to risk their careers to tell different stories. What happened to Lena Horne, Sammy Davis Jr., Dorothy Dandridge, Eartha Kitt, and others was not just about personal heartbreak. It was about a system that used race to control who could be seen as desirable, who could be a star, and who deserved